If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. What I'm going to tell you about is a lie so big that you may find it hard to believe. It's centered around the banks. The banking industry has been stealing huge amounts of your money for decades, much more than you ever imagined. But it's not just them. They've been colluding with the legal profession, the courts, politicians, and law enforcement to make sure you have very little chance to do anything about it. As a result, people have been losing their homes to these thugs by the thousands. This is the mortgage scam. It's the largest financial scam in the history of the world. The numbers are astronomical, almost unimaginable. You may not believe it at first, so I urge you to do your own research. But let's look at an example. Say you're a typical home buyer. You want to buy a home, but you don't have the required amount of money to be able to pay for it in full. So you go to a bank to secure a mortgage. Now, let's say that mortgage is for $300,000. That's how much you want to borrow. Here's a fact that you need to know up front. Banks don't lend money. They don't actually have any money. Well, not money that they can lend. Banks purchase securities. Now, securities can be stocks and bonds, but they can also be guarantees to advance funds. That's known as a promissory note. When you apply for a loan or mortgage, the bank requires you to sign a promissory note. Now, you think you're signing a contract, but you're not. A contract requires signatures from both parties, you and the bank. But if you went to look at the bank contract, you would find only one signature, and that's yours. A promissory note is legal tender. It's like a check. It's known in finance as a negotiable instrument. In other words, as good as cash. The promissory note is a promise to pay the bank the amount of the mortgage. In other words, the same amount you want to borrow. They promote this piece of paper as a contract, but it's not. This is contract fraud because they're not disclosing what they're actually doing. They're tricking you. They may also present this promissory note to you as an agreement, which allows them to avoid using the word contract to supposedly lessen their legal liability. But it's just more trickery. Black's Law Dictionary, which is the dictionary used as the basis for today's Admiralty court system, defines an agreement as follows. An agreement, as the courts have said, is nothing more than a manifestation of mutual assent by two or more parties, legally competent persons to one another. An agreement is not enforceable by law, but to even be valid, it must have two signatures, which if you're dealing with a bank mortgage, it never does. More trickery. But it gets much worse. Let's take a step back into the past. Everybody alive today has a financial bond attached to them through their birth certificate. You're not told about this bond. It was created by law in England in 1666, a long time ago. The law has a French name, the Cestui-que-vie Trust Act. It's also referred to as your straw man. In those days, people would go abroad in ships to discover the New World or otherwise travel for long periods of time away from their homes. In 1666, after the fire of London destroyed the entire city, trusts were set up to protect people's property while they were gone. When they returned, they were required to prove that they were alive in order to reclaim their property through their trust. Over time, this trust evolved to the point that when you're born, up to $1 million is deposited in your trust. And from that point on, it's traded on the stock market as a bond. Now, these bonds grew over time into multi-millions of dollars, and you're the beneficiary. These trusts are also called your straw man because they've created a legal fiction name, the same as your natural name, but while your natural name is in upper and lower case letters, the straw man name is in all capital letters. We call this a legal fiction because it's not actually you, but you're led to believe it is. You'll find this legal fiction name on your driver's license, your utility bills, your speeding tickets, hey, and when you're called to court. It's how they get you to agree to let them access your trust, which is what they ultimately want, so they can steal your money. Names in all capital letters denote a corporation. That's because banks can't actually sue a living man or woman, just a legal fiction name in capital letters. See how ingenious these folks are? When you get a utility bill with your name in caps, it means they're actually billing your trust. They take that charge out of your trust, but you pay that same utility bill thinking it's you that they're billing. But it's not. They're billing your trust. So they're getting paid twice. They're double dipping. Do some research on the word straw man, and you'll find out the truth in a lot more detail than I'm providing here. Back to the promissory note and the bank. Now, once the bank has the promissory note you signed, they go ahead and they process that payment, taking the money out of your C'est qui vie trust or your strawman account. All banks, credit card companies, the courts, the utility companies have access to the money in your trust or your strawman account. All they need is your name, your social security number, or in Canada, social insurance number, and your signature. The bank pockets this payment and then sets up a separate bank account for you in which they deposit your money. Or they might give you a check, which then you pay to the home seller to complete the purchase. In fact, what they're doing is getting you to pay for your new home with your money from your trust. But of course, they don't tell you that. This is mortgage fraud of the highest degree. In other words, what is sold to you as a mortgage contract is actually a cash swap. You give them the money from your trust, they give it back to you to pay for the house. The bank fraudulently misrepresents this swap and fraudulently tells you, the home buyer, that the money they deposit into your account comes from their bank reserves. In other words, it's a bona fide loan. Nothing could be further from the truth. The bottom line, there's no lawful contract because the bank has put up nothing of their own, and there's no loan transaction. The transaction is nothing other than a cash swap. Then they charge you compound interest on your money and tell you to pay the entire amount back to them. This results in huge returns to the bank or mortgage company over a protracted period of time, often 20 years or more. You end up paying about 3 times what you should for your home. Let's go back to our example. You apply for a $300,000 mortgage to be paid back over 25 years. The interest rate is, let's say, 5% compounded annually. Now, what does that amount to in interest? $750,000 roughly. Add in the principal for a grand total of over $1 million. Well, that's more than 3 times what the original price of your home was. This is the amount the bank pockets on the entire transaction over the 25 years. And it's all your money. That's the scam. It's been going on since mortgages began. So to recap, the bank gets you to sign a promissory note promoted to you as a contract, which is a lie. That's fraud. Then they cash in the promissory note by stealing the money from your trust account. Then they fraudulently loan your money back to you with compound interest on top. How's that for a scam? Ingenious, isn't it? How would you know? Well, you wouldn't. But hold on, because this lie gets even bigger. What they really want is your land. That's the ultimate prize. How do they get the land? Well, these days what they do is they set up mortgages for individuals with questionable credit ratings. Then they wait for them to default, I mean, just a few missed payments can send the fraudulent agreement into default. Then what they do is they send their attorneys after you using the completely corrupt Admiralty law system. The courts, of course, are in on the scam. Admiralty law, the law of the sea, is our current legal system. It's been weaponized against us. The courts are completely corrupt from top to bottom. And I have court documents to prove it. The fraud is conducted by the Bar Association, BAR. That stands for the British Accredited Registry. These bar attorneys pledge allegiance to the British Queen or King, whoever happens to be in charge at the time. All bar attorneys do this, even the judges. That makes them all illegal foreign agents and all working together in collusion. All these bar attorneys are working against you to steal your land, even if they're defending you in court. They work as a team to defraud you. It's a completely corrupt system. The British Crown, along with the Vatican, have controlled all of humanity for hundreds of years. They've been taking your money and land from you for decades. The game is to steal as much as they can. We become poorer and more destitute until we're finally dying of hunger or, my goodness, from a man-made disease. This is genocide, it's treason, and it's punishable by death. The evil began with the banking system. These corrupt banks sell and resell the fraudulent, non-existing contracts over and over to other banks and allow these other banks to recap similar profits from the home purchase, allowing the banking industry to pocket up to 3 times the original value of the home. And if you need more proof of this fraud within the courts, here's a recent court case in which the prosecutor of this case admitted to fraud and conspiracy right in the court transcript. The attorney starts by saying to the judge, I don't want to ask you to do work, sir, but there has been indication made in the past that my client will be sued for fraud and conspiracy, that I may be included in that statement of claim. I do believe that the courts downstairs, perhaps, are already gatekeeping. I'm not sure, but this... And then the court replies to the attorney, probably. Then the attorney replies, this one has slipped through the cracks. Wow. I mean, this is in the court transcript. Now, if you missed that, this is a bar attorney telling the judge that she's scared of being countersued by the victim for mortgage fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. Then she tells the court, who is obviously in on the whole scam, that there are gatekeepers tasked with keeping these counterclaims out of the courts. And this one somehow slipped through. What more do you need to hear from these criminals? Now let's quickly review this extraordinary scam. Okay, here we go. When you sign up for a mortgage for a home, you're tricked into thinking you're signing a contract, but it's actually a promissory note only. There is never a second signature from the bank. They often call this document an agreement, not a contract, and it is unenforceable in law. Promissory notes are legal tender, as good as cash. Then they cash this note and steal the amount from your personal trust account that you're never told about. That's fraud on a grand scale. Then they set up a new bank account or give you a check, which is your money to pay for the home you're purchasing. You have now paid for the home in full out of your trust account and owe nothing more. But then they turn around and trick you into thinking you owe both the original amount of the promissory note, the loan, supposedly, plus compound interest. Then they wait for the first sign of a default, and then they have their bar attorneys collude with the courts to steal your land. A much bigger prize. On top of that, they limit your ability to defend yourself in the courts, and they put gatekeeper clerks on staff to ensure any suits against them don't see the light of day. This has been going on for decades and affects virtually every home mortgage ever written up. It's the biggest financial scam in the history of the human race. This must end now. It is treason against we the people. These criminals must answer for their crimes. The sentence for treason is death. So be it. It's time to stand up and demand justice.